Okay, so let's jump into it. You want to talk about what we think about slash consider when designing multifunctional spaces for coexistence.
Yeah. And I think it's a
Right.
very broad conversation because it could be your home garden, it could be a school garden, it could be a community space. I've done work for like now I'm in a resort, so that's like we share the space with wildlife. So there's a lot of like things that we think about, but we kind of take it as part of our process.
So when you say coexistence, who do you mean
Yeah,
coexist with who?
other
Community? Other
people.
people? Other people.
Yeah,
Okay.
it could be other people. It could be wildlife. Yeah,
So because those are two quite different things, yeah. Uh,
I mean we
I thought
can
you
we can
wanted,
start. Yeah, either
yeah, because
place.
I thought you wanted to talk about wildlife because it's a very specific thing. I mean, it's like
Yeah,
that's about dealing with trunk roads and conservation spaces and stuff like that. You know,
I can talk about that.
why do we start with that? Because that's a little bit broader. The community one, I think, is those are social issues. You know what I mean? Those are things that are to do with how you set up uh, a system.
Also, cultural preferences. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you want to
So,
start with wildlife, I guess for me, setting up spaces. So I've not set up a space for wildlife out of nothing. It's usually spaces that already exist that I participate to condition. Like one of the spaces is when I was in Belum and we worked with the community. I want to say the name of the fish, Kala Sanctuary. So the area that we worked in was a river, a stretch of river that was one of the main rivers that fed the Belum Temenggo Lake.
okay.
And this stretch, it has a Kala because Kala only exists in like say class 1 rivers.
It has a
And
what?
it also has
Has a what?
Kala. Ikan Kala
What's that?
means class 1 rivers. It's a fish.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's a messer fish. And it needs like a class 1 river, which means it needs to be flowing at a certain speed. It needs to be very clear. And the water has to have high oxygen value. And it has all the surfaces for them to lay eggs and to spawn and to work around. So when the community started this work with Tenaga National Foundation, so the energy board, because they work in like hydroelectric dams and stuff, so they started this process of repopulating the Kela fish.
So is it their responsibility to do that by law? Are they legally required to do this? No.
Prior to do this, no, it's done as a community engagement program.
But you're saying it's paid for by a corporation like Tenaga?
So because Tenaga has access to a lot of these hydro dam areas, it's a water source. So because they have permits, it's easier to work with them. And they
So
bring
then,
quite a good.
so are they instigating this? Who's instigating this? Is the civil society instigating this, or is
It's
corporate or
community
kerajaan?
because this is no, it's community because the state park when it cares for the lake, it also does tourism license to boathouse operators. So when boathouse operators bring in their clients, they typically want to fish. And when they go fishing, it can become a situation of overfishing because when they go, they're allowed to take back all the catch that they
Okay,
haul.
let me just wind that back. So you're saying this belongs to a national park?
What is this? Sorry, I don't understand. The
This
fish
body
park,
of water.
it is governed
You know,
by the
my
national
central
park.
question is who's supposed to do this work? Because it costs money, it costs time, it costs labor, manpower. Whose job is it to do it? Is
Technically,
it
it
the
doesn't
person who
belong
owns
to
the land? Is it the person who owns the land? So if
the
you're saying
state
this
owns
is
the
a
land.
national, huh?
The state owns the land.
So it's the state's job to make sure that the wildlife isn't harmed?
You can say it's the state's job, but the state is not required to do it. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, because if you so fisheries department has a responsibility because they have a state mandate and a national mandate. They look at sea fishing and inland fishing. So in the inland fishing areas, they populate public streams and rivers. So technically,
Okay.
they don't do parks, national parks, state parks. So because the state park has its own governing body, that governing body they have a bunch of things to do. It could be one of the
Okay.
things that
Hang
they
on a
need.
second. Hang on. I've
Yeah.
just got to. Osman, kasi dia itu kota. Sorry, I have to pick up.
Yeah, so it depends. It depends on what their priorities are. And in the case that I'm citing, we worked with the energy board because they have all the permits to enter hydro, source areas. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's still a little not clear to me, like how that works.
Like what? How?
Which is an issue because you know the the common layperson probably understands it even less. Like I think the assumption is that someone's taking care of all of it, and we don't. So I mean, it's hard to really figure out like who's supposed to be dealing with this. I understand if it's a public state park, it must come under the purview of the state, right? That means they would trigger. So if there's a problem, they would trigger some kind of mechanical response to it to get it done. If it's if it's if it affects fishing, for example, it is actually a source for breeding or stuff like that. You're saying it comes under fisheries, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because in terms of policy, it's governed under the Wildlife Act.
The what?
So it's governed under the Wildlife Act.
Okay.
Yeah. So then that's a national interest. It's not a state interest. So there's a lot of these policies that you need to know who is the
Right.
caretaker.
I guess that's what I'm getting at. It's like
Yeah.
who? Yeah. Somebody needs to know
Yeah, but
this,
we don't
right?
expect lay people to know this anyway, because
Right.
you wouldn't be able to run a project anyway, because it's
Yeah.
it's a state park. Yeah, yeah. Then the state park can decide who he wants to collaborate with.
Right. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So
at
this
the
affects.
level.
So this affects waterways. It affects sort of wildlife reserve land. Actually, explain to me wildlife reserve. I don't really understand that. So are there protected areas?
There's many types of protected areas.
Okay.
Some protected as state land, where just state has it to harvest timber as and when they need it. So that's
Really?
state land. There's
Okay.
some state land which is already converted from timber into palm oil, where they hire
Wow.
people to run it, and that's state owned. It could be any of the commodities. It could be rubber. It could be palm oil. And then you have protected areas, which are river buffer zones, which are water catchment areas, which are wildlife. Biodiversity intense areas. So you have
So those are like national parks and places like that. Right?
Yeah, so some are national parks, some are state parks. So then the level of protection also differs. Some have forever coverage, and some have limited time coverage or priority coverage, and some are a reserved land for logging. So the state does have the logging rights that they then give out as permits in concessions that they give to the loggers. So yeah, there's a lot of interconnected pieces that if you don't work in government, you actually don't know. Like even for
Right.
us, when I was working in Belum, we know that Temenggor is an active logging site. It's a it's a given for the next 30 years.
Right.
However, in terms of the micro movements of the plots where they're logging, nobody knows until the logger gets a permit. It's they make the decision very late on, or they just don't want how to say disruption in the process, because it is their right to log. And then the question is, do they monitor the replanting? So then that affects rivers as well. So a lot of times when I was with WWF, when we look at the logging concessions that are given out and the schedules that they lay out, the issue is always about protecting the buffer zone. So the buffer zone not only protects fish, it also protects birds. So for instance, where we did our Kela sanctuary, it is a very active hornbill area. So hornbills only nest in trees where the girth are 80 centimeters and above. And if the trees are not large enough for them to burrow holes in them, uh, they end up moving on to a different area. And
Mm.
so what happens is you have a lot of current conservationists who basically build nesting boxes and hang them up at certain
Wow.
elevations that match where the hornbills would roost. So there's a lot of things linked to the river, and I think it's the rewilding, but it is reintroducing cornerstone species, and like kind of going back to the Kela. Kela doesn't exist alone. It exists with another fish called tengas, and they are usually how to say, they look very similar, and you can't tell the difference if you are untrained. So just from the top of the surface, they all look the same. One is
Oh, wow.
but they're basically the same size, faster than eat it with the community. I It's just as good. So yeah, it's very hard to say.
So there's all. What about flora? What about plants? Because that's another layer of expertise that's required. Are there people? So when there's a project like that, is there like a
We're in a
horticulturist
primary
involved?
forest. So in Belom, it's a primary forest. So it's a mountain top primary forest. So you have to understand the historical geography of the area. It was
Yeah.
tops of mountains, and then they flooded it to create a boundary between Malaysia and Thailand. And so, being that it is used with the top of forest, the type of trees we get are very different. Although the species has moved up the elevation, in relative height to say Ipoh, we are a lot higher up on the scale. So when it comes to the conversation about trees, then we do have like specific foresters that collect certain kind of tree saplings, wildlings, and seedlings, and then they grow them and then they bring them out. So when people have been going crazy about this planting a million trees, a trillion trees, some of those species do come from Belom and the surrounding area. And we do have certain species that only come from that area. So we have endemic species as well.
And is there a person or body or agency that's monitoring the sort of wellness of it? Like
Of what, the park?
are there, yeah, are there
State park?
problems here? Like, just in terms of let's say just the flora, right? Is there like an annual checkup to see whether things uh, are healthy or anything like that?
So technically, that falls under the purview of the state park in collaboration with the forestry department,
Mm.
because the forestry department should have a schedule like monitoring of the areas that they govern in terms of looking at the quality of the seeds that are growing in the area, looking at the how to say nesting when they start to flower and bloom and
Yeah,
release
yeah.
their seeds, because that affects the wildlife as well. So a lot of animals depend on these mastings for as food. So whether they eat the flowers and the leaves, or they eat the fruits that come out from it, or they eat the early growth that the little plants that come out. So then you see masting occurring during migratory season, for instance. So then you have an overlap of things that are airborne, things that are in the arboreal space, and then things that are on the forest floor and things that are in the river. So then you have this 4-layer, 7-layer transaction that happens. So somebody at the top of the canopy will be eating, it falls down, it goes to the river. The fish will eat the leftovers, or some other animal would eat that piece of fruit, or insects. When there's a certain period where it's messing, you have a lot of cicadas, for instance. So then that becomes food source as well. And some things after mating die. So then that, like damsel flies. So there'll be a lot of damsel flies on top of the river, and then fish come to feed, and then people come to collect the fish. So there's this whole web of life that's happening as the forest is changing. So when you repopulate a cornerstone species, you actually create a lot of energy flow in these other layers as well. So that's kind of, yeah, that's as wild as the work that I've done in terms of thinking of the
Okay.
space, and not just
It's
the
actually quite
space, but
complex, huh?
it's very complex. Yeah, because the
Yeah.
seasons change as well.
So
And then when it's rainy season, especially for us when we're in a dam, and this is why we work with TMB. TMB has the authority to release the water during the drought into Ipoh, which means although it's a drought, we may be dry in the landscape, but down in Ipoh there'll be enough water because they are bleeding us out to give water source to other people outside. So sometimes
yeah, because that's another variable, which is this climate change. It's changing patterns
yep,
and all that kind of stuff.
yep.
Yeah. Wow. Quite a
Yeah,
lot to
so
know.
that's all these. Yeah, it's very complex when it comes down to like the execution, because as much as we have a hypothesis or we have evidence, we need to go into these like state level meetings, if not national level meetings, to table certain things, and negotiations happen before the meeting. So you are talking to the people at the power board, who's looking at the hydroelectric water level. You're talking to the community. You're trying to figure out like what's a safe level, how much water do we need, what's happening to their farmland, and then you're talking to people who are along the way where the water goes from the main way out. And you're looking at other people because they have cage fishing. As you leave the dam, you have a lot of cage fishing along the river. So they get
Oh,
affected too when there's too much water moving too fast. It drags their cage nets. So then, so there's an alert process. There is collaboration with the fisheries department. There's a collaboration that maybe it's not a collaboration with tourism, but there's a directive for tourism to follow. That okay, you cannot bring in this amount of tourists at this time because we're flushing. So there's many layers to the process. Yeah.
okay. All right. So just to kind of talk along the lines of how you describe it is how do you design these multifactorial spaces? So I asked that because that's a very specific kind of a space, which is, you're trying to manage forest, indigenous community, uh, natural asset resources. So there's quite,
Yeah.
right, it's quite complicated. Um, and then on the other end of that, there's actually how do we manage a city, because those same things, there are dynamics going on in a city, which is fundamentally changing, which I presume no one's really taking care of, right? No one.
It's
Yeah.
so
So
privatized, and it's so like, I mean, if we talk about common sense, it's a community garden, but it sits under again the power lines, which means
actually, before we get there, I mean, I'm also thinking about things like which I've seen in, I came back in 2010, so between 2010 and now, I've seen some developments happening like near where I live, right? Say, maybe condo developments or something like that,
mm,
and I've seen its impact. For example, you start to see wild animals actually, like pythons,
yeah,
suddenly they're starting to appear because they've been moved. They've been affected because some area that's been wild for many years is now being claimed into the development.
yeah,
So it starts to move. So I've seen like, python on the road. Uh, we see more. You know what I mean? We see more of these sort of things happening, and it's sort of happening more and more and more. And no one's really measuring or managing this at all, right? So we're losing habitat for wildlife. We're also losing habitats which provide eco services. Water retention, shade, air cooling, all this kind of stuff. Yeah. How do you think that should be managed? There should be some kind of government body. I don't
The thing
really know
is,
how they do.
comes down to so the idea of people public private partnership is really quite an innovation. The idea is that local people in a place collaborate with, say, NGO or independent, amateur scientific bodies, and collaborate with corporates and collaborate with government. So that's how you get things like Friends of Bukit Kiara, for instance. So it's literally just a community
Okay,
group
that's a good point.
that
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
is taking care of an area which is in our backyard.
Okay, so that
And
is
then
actually something that I also see. It is actually an absence of civil society engagement. So, for example, I think there's a lot of there is not really much management. For example, like I see a lot of information from Malacca because it's a UNESCO space, and so the people are reporting about things being built. Something like that would kind of never happen in New York because you have to put all the information on the front of the work site, and people are really quite knowledgeable. They're like super nosy. They will read everything. They will go up to the meeting to make sure. For example, like one of the things they were fighting back against in New York just around the time I was leaving was they were starting because New York started to get quite full. So what they were doing is they were starting to build very tall buildings. They were smaller footprint, but much taller. But what was happening with those buildings was they were actually throwing very long shadows,
mm,
and they were changing some of the. It was affecting like Central Park, the edges of Central Park. It was getting cooler and more shaded, and people were really pushing back. There was demonstrations and stuff like that. Here, I don't even see sometimes when they're building something that there's no information on the front gate, on the front, you know,
mm,
which they're supposed to do, right?
I think technically that they are required by law to put out
Right.
all construction information. But
Yeah.
in terms of civil society pushing back, I think Malaysia is still in its days
Yeah.
of development,
Yeah.
and they're
I don't think we understand the importance
unaware.
of that
Yeah,
yet.
they're just unaware of why certain things need to be protected, because the perception is that if you can live in an urban suburb, why can't I? I want to live that high quality life. But they are not understanding the trade off when you lose the green space, because they've never lived in a fully built environment before. So, like, I've worked with a batik artisan in Kuala Terengganu many, many years ago. He used to live like this by the beach. So, he used to have a shed of a house. He would paint batik underneath his house because, Malay houses are on stilts. And he goes swimming and he'll put out a net. And then, when it's too hot, he'll swim again and he'll go grab his fish and he'll come back. He'll make his batik blocks and he'll continue work. And that's his everyday cycle. And I think in 2010, they moved him into a PPR flat. Low cost flat. And when he moved there, he was literally living in a concrete box. And you could tell that he aged so much faster from the stress of being in a physical space.
Right.
When he was
Right.
outside,
Yeah.
it's just breeze, but nothing was still, nothing was fixed, nothing was rigid. And so life felt alive. But when he lived in his cement box, nothing was moving except him and his hand and his cloth, because he was, and so he felt the quality of his life degrade over those years that he lived. And I think he passed after 8 years of living in that PPR house. And he was a national batik artisan. And it's really sad that was how he passed. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just writing a piece now, which is sort of like a philosophical piece, and it deals with two sides, two sides to an equation. The title of it is called "The Great Outdoors," but it actually starts with almost half the piece is talking about the migration indoors, which is something I saw in a very sort of kind of a shocking way when I came back. I
Yeah.
didn't, it's like people were not realizing that there was this migration. No one's really noticing it, never mind pushing back against it. So what I see is actually more and more urban buildup. So there's actually just more built landscape. Okay, so we're starting to see the first problem is actually the beginning of heat islands. You know, it's replacing planted space. Before we had our buildings were all interspersed with trees and green spaces and stuff like that. And now you're just building more and more concrete. You're building more asphalt. There's actually sometimes you go in some areas, there is actually um 80% man-made material, you know, between the highway and the asphalt road and the buildings and all that. So you're starting to start to see a shift in the heat situation because it's absorbing more heat, it's reflecting more heat, um, that kind of thing.
It doesn't provide shade.
Doesn't provide shade. Okay. So what you have then is you have this increase of built malls. I mean, we just keep building malls. And in some way those malls, as they build more malls and more roads connecting these malls, because the malls connect suburbs and stuff like that, we are also seeing an escalation of the input of air conditioning. You know, so air conditioning is another problematic factor because air conditioning is not creating cool air. It's actually taking regular air, pulling out the heat and throwing it back outside, right? So what you're doing is actually you're creating even hotter spaces outside of the malls.
Yeah.
And you hear it
And
in a
malls all
conversation.
come with large parking lots.
Yeah, and you hear it in the
Huge.
conversations that they say, "Oh, it's so hot. How can you expect us to be outside?" But actually, they each contribute to each other, right? So the
Yeah.
air conditioned spaces are now looking like normal places. It's like I'd rather go there because the temperatures feel normal, which is actually an even a bigger side issue. Because the other thing I was noticing is what the hell are people wearing like autumn and winter clothes here? Corduroy. Because as a clothing designer, I kind of notice these things. Sweatshirts, hoodies. I'm like, this is crazy. They're building these spaces actually that are so cold. They're overcooled. So you're wearing the wrong kinds of clothes. You're also starting to want to eat the wrong kinds of food. So you want to eat foods that you would tend to want to eat in a cold, cool, temperate climate. Pizzas and all these kind of things are actually to warm you up. That sort of fat intake actually helps you deal with it. So there's something really crazy going on. It's like this snowball effect.
It's design. It's design. At the end of the day, the ignorance in design
It's a kind of
creates
ignore. Yeah, yeah. So there's a
unintended
literacy issue
outcomes.
here. People don't realize this is a problem, and uh, people are getting away with building these things. No one's kind of holding it back. No one's saying,
Because they're looking at the
"Hey,
commercial value of the building.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah." Unless you're doing like a real, yeah, and even then they're finding ways around it. Like, when I was doing like it's kind of pottery, they would
Yeah.
they were kind of massaging around. They're supposed to keep X% as green spaces or whatever, but you can see that they're majoring themselves all around these numbers.
Checklist. It's checklist.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah. So okay, then
Did
the
they give
third
you
thing,
any specific design, like guideline, when you were doing that space?
all I knew was that it was falling under a very actually there was a conversation. that they wanted to make sure that these public spaces were built before they kind of get lost in the wash and the corporations start to just invade into those spaces. So unless it's a good, like, and that was what Lab DNA was doing. They were trying to ensure that there are laws that says for, I can't, what was it, 30% of something must be allocated to green space, and that it is being fulfilled. But what happens is, you leave it, and they will start to encroach on, and before you know it, it's all those spaces are shrunk, you know. So one of the tactics was just show all those places, just make sure there were plans put into place, uh, but then there are also no plans to fund it. Uh, like like who's going to pay for the parks and all that kind of stuff,
Maintenance, yeah.
Yeah, maintenance, even what we were doing, which was activation. It's like, what's the point of building a park and maintaining it, having people cut the grass, and it's just not fit for people to spend time in. They're just these raw spaces. So it's quite complex
I
here.
mean, like even when we did EduCity Commons, the Commons area,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it had like three different contractors working on the same site, and the project manager was barely communicating across the board. They had like, they gave us a directive. So we were building all the appropriate technology stuff. We had like a cop oven. Our activation was based on sustainable living activations, right? And in the end, I think they moved the whole site. Whatever the other group designed, their growing house and stuff like that, was moved from what was the base of the floodwater bowl to the side on the top. And we had told them this was this was a rainwater storm bowl from the first time
yeah.
we
I
went
mean,
on
I mean,
site.
I remember I wasn't involved with that, but I could see that was going to be a problem, which is what the problem ended up being. It was
Yeah.
really just the concept of it was wrong. It was actually a catchment. It was a catchment area.
Yes.
Everything
It's a
flooded.
stormwater catchment area.
Yeah. They were allowing the contractor to decide some of the plants, and he's putting in plants like cactus in a swampland, like crazy, kind of crazy.
No, and then they had this great idea of having all those art installation that was basically those like connected bridges that kind of work like a maze, but they're all in half in the water and
Yeah,
half
yeah,
on land. And the
yeah.
thing is, like, all those things didn't like. It's just the master plan design did not understand the use of the space, and I feel like it was a
It also
real
didn't even have the expertise. You really needed like a botanist to figure some of this out. No,
yeah.
you can't do this. Something like that. Just a lot of, it's almost like a meetings full of ideas and without any real schematic to figure out, oh, is this going to work? Is this basically a good idea? Is this.
Yeah.
So,
Yep, yep.
um,
But that is the typical story of most Malaysian projects.
yeah.
It's sad, but it's the reality of it.
I don't know what the solution for that is, whether it's, uh, I mean, part of it is where I see it changing is if the property developer is visionary. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they're visionary because it's a competitive game. I mean, if they do a better job, they get a better buy-in. So so there is definitely a commercial element to that, which I mean could be solved by that commercial kind of competitiveness.
But
But
I
it does
think
need to be
putting too
balanced.
much commercial value into it will also not allow it to grow organically in an alternative way. Because a commercially driven entity would just want to see dollars and cents. And then it will be gentrification more than the weaving of community, the develop. Because, this happens when they say, okay, let's build a community garden. And then all the plants are bought at a half age and just planted. And they never came from seed, they never go to seed, they never get harvested. So these are the traps that if you've never experienced running these kind of programs, you're just gonna fall right in because you don't know what the commercial people are gonna push you into.
Another big problem is, just to get it back to the design thing is actually, and that's changing a little bit. We're starting to see some small changes at at a sort of master plan level, which is even though we've moved a little bit away from Victorian planting, which is bedding plants and stuff like that, we haven't really moved away from driving planting. That means they're building green spaces for you to actually just drive around, which is very different when in a more modern understanding of what makes a place, a city or urban environment greener or experientially more rewarding is that they should be walking spaces. They should be better for walking. They're interconnected, they're interesting, they're pathways. So, and that's not happening. So, you see, like, they'll build this big lake and you have to drive around the whole thing,
But it comes
you know,
back to that very typical park development where they assume everybody's gonna run around the park.
and there's also,
When you sit down
the,
and you
the,
listen
the
to
challenge is also there is, you also need a populace that understands that the importance of this too. Layla. Um, so, and you can see the dichotomy here, especially in Iskandar, because Iskandar has a higher level of expats, so they come from places where they know a little bit more about these things. So you can see there is actually a little bit of friction between, they struggle to, even their renting or buying places to live, those developments are not very friendly for them as spaces to move around in. It's a very long way to the gate or what, and it's not a very pleasant walk to the gate, that kind of thing. Whereas maybe a more typical Malaysian doesn't even know that this is an issue, you know, because he's just driving there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think also the fact that when we live in like urban neighborhoods, like literally there is no place to plant anything. You plant a tree, all the leaves fall in your car, and then that's a
Yep.
nuisance. So as a kid, when I grew up in Section 5, all the houses had trees. All the houses had hedges. All the houses had potted plants. But now you go to most places, they don't
Mm.
water them. So
I mean, but I think, what I'm implying is also quite an important aspect is that if there is no pushback, if there's no understanding by the ultimate consumer, there is no pushback. No one's asking for the law to be kept or all that kind of stuff. So one of the solutions lies in that space, and actually, which is actually an opportunity for people like you and me, because the one interesting thing that I read recently, which I think was quite interesting, I have not really followed up on this, is actually people find it very hard to understand what is better. You know, so even for many Western countries, they don't understand that it's better to have a downtown that is greener, but also quite heavily populated. Density is actually not a bad thing. So one of the things that was being proposed is actually the the illustration of this using AI, which I thought that's quite interesting, right? And I saw some of it very interesting. They were using the style was like that. Was that Japanese film director that makes the firefly or butterfly move? It was in that style, the thousand fireflies or dragonflies or whatever it is. So they were recreating, uh, they were re-illustrating these places so that someone can see what it would look like with more plants, more dense, but a lot more people are walking around and using the space. Yes. I think that is one potential way out. It's content. It's like people need to understand why they should desire something, and that desire is informed by maybe a level of expertise that they don't have that requires a botanist, or a naturalist or a wildlife expert to provide,
Yeah, but the thing is, it's hard to find a botanist that will work alone and develop the whole space. It needs to be
Yeah.
project together between the botanist, the socialist, the activation person. It needs to be. Used to have a really good Taman Botani in Putrajaya. Back in the day, I think I was like 19 or 20 when that was ready.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was really well designed. And then it just never got handed over properly. Like
Yeah.
today, it's
But
okay, but it's not what it was in the beginning. Yeah.
so just on that point, there's also the landscape architecture part of it, which is something I noticed because I really was fighting for more naturalistic landscape because it's very hard to get it in that because people don't understand why you want to do that. Because even landscape architects here are more interested in doing uh, built landscape. They want to build bridges and pathways and fancy things as opposed
But it
to
comes down
being,
to the intention of the design. If the intention is just to put something that gives them a signature, then it will be everyone trying to make a park that has a certain look.
yeah.
But
It's not even that, it's partly a little bit of so the landscape architect is a frustrated architect. He wants to build little buildings and bridges and all these kind of things. Then you're dealing with someone who just the developer who just wants convenience. It's like, why do you want to buy those trees? They are 400 ringgit. You can get these for 200 ringgit, but the 250 ringgit ones are just the ones that the nurseries here are planting in the thousands, which are South American trees. You know, so it's hard to.
but
It's like a
honestly,
swamp. Yeah.
when I was doing social forestry work, to grow indigenous endemic species plant for the 100 saplings that you collect or the seeds that you grow, the rate of survival is maybe like 50%. And of that 50%, it takes you 3 years to get to like 2 feet tall. So by the time it's 4 feet tall and 5 feet tall, it's been in the ground for like
But
8 years.
that
And then once it reaches that peak, it
yeah.
grows really fast. But
Yeah.
getting it there, and
But you
that's
know what?
what
That should not
what
be a
challenges.
problem. That should not be a problem because that's one reason why I was able to do a little bit more interesting work in Johor because Singapore understands that. So Singapore is buying these things from Johor. So the way I would get these things is actually I would just go to the nursery. Otherwise if you just ask them for stuff, they will just tell you very basic stuff. But I would go and I would go and look at all their stuff, and I could see they're growing things for Singapore clients, and parks being one of them. And they are actually planting waterscapes and dryscapes and grasslands and stuff like that.
And then they're
And
also
then
really
I'm sort of having to negotiate with them to say, oh, can I have 100 of these?
no, but you
So
look at Singapore
it's
design.
that is not a problem. The idea of actually figuring out how to plant it is not a problem, because Singapore does it and they do it just well in advance. Things are they buy from seed 2 years before the project.
Yeah,
The
no, they
nurseries know.
hire the nursery to grow the species they want, and that's why
Yes,
you can buy them because
yeah.
it's
Well, or
purposefully
they're
structured.
paying top dollar for it basically. So they negotiate with the nursery. They want this plant. They want this
Yeah.
assortment of plant. The nursery grows, 30% more. Hang on. Layla, what are you doing? Um, so they're paying 30% more so that they always will have enough, you know. And that's why I was getting a lot of my plants was actually that overflow of stock,
Yeah.
you know.
No, I was just going to say that even in Singapore, the other thing that they do really well is they're removing development to grow wetland plants. They're removing development in certain areas to grow
Okay, that's another thing. Like they're looking at a
No,
much
no,
more
but
high. Yeah,
very intentional and designed. It's not
yeah,
like on a whim. Okay, we're just gonna buy a whole bunch of cheap plants and chuck it
sure.
there. you
Yeah.
know. So
Yeah.
I think it comes back to what is the intention of a particular green space? Is it meant to enrich children to be outdoors? And if
Yeah.
so, then what are the kind of physical structures we want to allow kids to, develop motor skills, develop confidence,
Yeah.
learn how to share, shared resources. Is the area full of like elderly people? Do we need to make walkways more,
Yep.
smooth, or does it need to be more rough? Does it need to be the incline to be a bit more gradient? Or do steps work better? Do they want more exercise equipment? Do they need hand railings? So you're designing with the intention of multi-generational use
So we're
without
back to
considering
actually it's an educational process because if the general public doesn't know this, the the capitalist, the commercial side, I'm going to provide it. They will
but that's
just
the thing.
do.
By the time
Yeah.
you see a development,
Yeah.
everything's already been designed.
Yeah.
You never know what's happening to an empty plot until somebody puts a brand on it. That's just
Yeah.
how it happens here. And
Mm.
and that's a sad thing because the state doesn't have these outlines for the developer. It doesn't require you to have certain things. It doesn't say like, okay, if you're building 6 blocks of apartments where it houses 1,000 people, 1,000 people need this amount of square footage access of green parks. So you stretch it by making longer walkways, smaller fringe waterways, so that there's all these reflection ponds and all these like butterflies coming in,
Mm.
dragonflies playing in the area. You grow tall plants so that they can perch. So all this design comes in when rules are set. When the state provides you with rules, designers become more creative. Without a boundary, everything can happen, nothing can happen. So it's
Well,
a
also
little bit,
there also needs to be a sort of what I would describe as a wet edge of creativity. Because, for example, like let's say in New York, the High Line was a public-private uh, uh, combination. It was actually instigated by activists, funded 50% by um, actually a lot of fashion companies, who are interested in this. And then when they had that, they got the state to match the funding for it. And then what happened is what gets put into the city is actually a kind of planting that is actually very different and new, uh, very naturalistic, this whole prairie, wildflower meadow type thing. So you start to introduce to people the beauty of something like that, which also and the thing is, it's not just pretty and beautiful, it's actually more sustainable. They're, compared to the Victorian style gardens that we see here, which require constant care, fertilization, replanting of all the animals, cutting of the grass. These are just these more naturalistic things that you're just like traffic controlling them
self-soothing
a
as
little bit.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is happening much slower here. So there's nothing at that front end. Like I would desperately trying to
I
do
think it
tropical
comes
meadows and
back
stuff.
down to the conversation we had about brain drain. I don't remember if it was on a podcast or it was just us on the phone the other day. We're talking about brain drain. And brain drain is a very serious thing. The
Yeah,
ones that study here that never go
yeah,
out and never get
yeah,
exposed
yeah,
end up staying here. But the
yeah.
ones who study abroad and see the world never
There's
come
also
back
a
here.
problem about value. I mean, we have a very well-known landscape designer friend,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
But he doesn't work here. He does hardly any work in Malaysia. You know,
I mean, he does, but they're all for like the upper echelons of society.
private, very small private thing. I mean, no, they're not using that talent to build this sort of. Yeah, yeah. It's a complicated issue, but I still think that content is part of the solution. That, for example, let's go back to the meadow thing, right? So I did do a project, and it was my second attempt at doing a meadow. Okay, meadow is
Yep.
actually quite hard to execute here, because it's they've been doing it for a while now. There's a landscape designer called Pete Udolph who's really sort of started that whole thing. I think in the West they've been doing it for like 20 years, so they not actually even know what to plant. He's become an expert at the. He actually has a nursery specializing growing all these sort of plants that do very well left alone in these sort of natural environments. And so my first attempt at it was at Heritage Forest, and we are also we have challenging issues because we don't have this cleansing effect of a winter, you know,
Yeah,
which is what makes meadows
where everything
beautiful.
dies back and then grows again.
It just kills everything down. It kills all the weeds, the germs, all that, and everything comes back. Here, things are just going on and on and on and on and on. So you actually start
Right.
to build up. You're building up with pests. You're building up with all this stuff. So the solution actually lies. You have to be really, really smart and knowledgeable what you choose to plan to make that happen. So
Yeah.
my first problem was doing it for the first time. Like there were a couple of plants that didn't work. Then we were also dealing with a lot of stray weeding, natural weeding like lalang and stuff like that. So so that was problematic, and then it sort of settled down. I got to see it over a couple of years, and I kind of know like a thing or two now about it. And then
Right.
then there was another project with it, and this time I'm dealing. This time I'm not trying to convince someone to put in a meadow. They actually wanted a meadow, but their
Oh, nice.
notion of no, but their notion of a meadow is something they've seen on TikTok or
Wow.
Instagram. So they have no understanding of actually what is happening in this grassland. I'm like, we got to cut it all back every now and again, right? They're like, oh, really? So there's,
Dangerous.
all they
I
want
think
is
it's
just the
dangerous when
swaying.
they when
They want the grass swaying in the breeze with the flowers going. I'm like, okay, well, that requires a certain kind of care as well.
but it
You
also
know?
depends if the place is windy enough to do the job.
Yeah.
You can grow a meadow in a place that has no wind and then it won't be swaying.
Actually, no. The tropics meadows are on the environment is very hostile to grassland and meadow because it will overpopulate it with other grasses, and then it will actually secondary growth will come up. Before you know it, there's a small secondary forest coming through. The your
Because
your
soil.
what is it, fundudo or condudo? The melastoma will start coming through. Then you have the secondary trees, the wild cinnamon, and before you know it, it's a small forest. Yeah, Sendudo. That's right. Yeah. Actually, what is quite easy to do here, and we don't do enough of this, is actually something that I also did at Heritage Forest, which was actually a thing, and it was something that was developed by a Japanese guy. They were actually doing it in India, which is actually these very dense, hyper dense forests
Okay.
of natural species, and they are designed to be left alone, and they actually provide eco services. They just allow better water retention for rain, and you have no sound.
The dense planting of trees.
Yes, so they were called. I want the word for it. So they're actually just very dense forests, much denser than if you were just to leave the forest to grow itself. So it's intentionally planted dense, and the density actually forces competition to quicken the rate of growing. So you
Okay.
actually have a dense forest very quickly in a short
Okay.
amount of time that that very quickly will offer you eco services. That means it absorbs rain, it provides wildlife refuge, it cools the air, it breaks down sound. So it's really good
Okay.
to plant in cities, to break up highways, this kind of thing. That is
Okay.
something that we could do a little bit more of. I do see places like that in KL. I don't know if they're actually intentionally done or they just leave it. They just leave forested areas until.
Um, I feel like in terms of whether or not they do anything to the forest area, I think they're just leaving it for a while. I don't think they are particularly managing it that way.
Yeah,
It's just like it's in between land. They've cleared it, and then sunduruk grows, and it becomes a sunduruk forest.
sure,
And
sure.
they
Yeah.
know that they're going to harvest it later. So it's just like
So, so
KIV.
I, so, so one more element to this, which is something that you do see in when it's things like these meadows and stuff like that, which we don't see. Here, if you leave it, you actually when they do the prairies by the designers like Pete Udolph or whatever, they're actually manipulated. They're made more beautiful than they really would be in real life. But in
Yeah,
doing that,
it's
they
not
actually
natural, but it's
it's
done
not
in
natural
such
to be
a
that
delicate way.
that pretty or that beautiful. Be
Yes.
quite random.
Yeah.
But what it does,
Yeah.
the importance of having something like that is actually it does engage with the the city dweller, and the city dweller becomes more bonded with his environment. They fall in love with these spaces. So they will go there more. They will demand it more. They are much happier when there's news about these places being developed. So I think that's also necessary. So that's something that's missing is we don't have a sort of a beauty in our natural spaces. You know, and I can kind of see it in the react. People don't think of natural spaces as beautiful.
I look at Villa, right? And you have to remember that Uncle Hayum, who when he developed Villa, he developed it to be a garden by the sea. So people actually come and take a lot of pictures in our garden.
Mm,
But then that's intentionally designed. It looks very nice and green, but we're watering like water is free. We're using well water to water the garden because it
right,
dries
right,
so quickly in
right.
the wind. Yeah. So yes, it is intentional, and it is like we're weeding things that don't match the lawn. So it's a lawn. It's a lawn. So there's things that we have to do because there's an
Yeah,
aesthetic that we need to keep, and then there are things that we
yeah.
let grow wild because it looks nice in its natural form. So yeah, there is
That is one
it
thing
does
that I
definitely.
do when I do work is I actually always talk the client out of a lawn and build more borders and more paths. I'm like, don't you want to sit in here, walk around more? Otherwise, you're always just paying for someone to cut the grass, and grass never looks good unless you cut it. It's 3 weeks maximum, right? I
Yeah,
mean, you
yeah,
must know
yeah,
this, right? Already at 3 weeks is already looking a bit shaggy, you know?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I cut grass 4 weeks ago. It's feeling, yeah.
Yeah. So I always want to replace it with actually just more ground cover or walkways or deeper beds. When I say deeper
Right.
beds, I mean the beds are bigger and there's just more variety in the planting. They're not just full of,
Yeah.
they're like very low plants in the front, very tall plants at the back, that kind of thing. So you feel more like you're walking through a garden. So it's,
Right.
it's sort of, okay. Well, we're coming up to our hour. That was quick.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's very hard to talk about design and how you think about design if you don't have a specific thing to talk about because we're designing all the time, and I think we don't realize how much we are actually intentionally doing these things. And
Yeah.
then, like you said, when it comes to community, it's a whole different negotiation process. When it comes to government entity, larger bodies like corporates and stuff like that, there are different things that we have to perform to get buy-in. And then there's
Yeah.
the time
Yeah.
scale. And we're lucky that there's not a particular like season for us to be doing what we're
Yeah.
doing. So in that
So I
sense,
mean, there are some chinks in that sort of indicate that there are some paths. Or one like I said, even though they're looking at a meadow on TikTok, they're still looking at a meadow. It's still something. It's better than nothing. And I think that is just going to increase more and more. People also travel more, so they see more things now. They're seeing more parks in international cities. Like and and some places are getting really good. Like China has fantastic parks now. So this is the rate of that happening is faster now. People are seeing more things. If it's not online or in real life, it is actually happening a little bit faster. So I think that's one component. The second component is AI is quite interesting, and we haven't even really done anything about it. We can actually create more content to actually show what
Yep.
could be better. I haven't really. Have you? Do you do much? Like certainly haven't done anything about visuals. It just sort of weirds me out a little bit. They just look so fakey, and then I'm not that
I think
technical. You
yeah,
know?
no, I think the most I've used AI was when I was doing the Singaporean module development stuff. My colleagues used it a lot. Um,
Oh, really? Yeah,
this was in 2023. Yeah, this was
yeah,
not
yeah,
day. So I felt like also because I read a lot. So I was reading some of the stuff and I'm like, okay, that's kind of only half of the story because again, AI basically just compiles, right? That's what it does. It's an
yeah.
engine
So
that
I
compiles.
use it. I use that a lot. I mean, I don't like using AI to write anything because whenever I've tried it, it just looks really kind of like weird. The voice seems really weird to me.
Because we
But
read and we write
but
as
you know
well,
where
right?
AI really worked is in search. So what you need to do, you need to search
And
for
it's
your
good for data validation.
and now it's compiling, it's organizing, it has all your links here. So it is actually quite valuable in providing you much more resource to research the subject, you know. And and then this fear that it's actually I don't really understand this fear that it's actually doing a lot of fake stuff because what it does is actually it's pulling up a lot of stuff for me. And I will always go and look at that stuff. If it's referring something, I'll go and look at it. But you don't have to go look at all the search results, go through all the search results for. But I'm
Yeah.
definitely not using the visual side of this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like I curate Brimba the card game on Facebook and sometimes some really good videos come up and I've
Oh really?
read these things before. So coming back to the fact that I know this occurs in nature, but it's never been visually documented because it's just so unique or so like you just have to be at the right place at the right time. And then I look at the video like twice and I go like, this is fake. But the fact that
Wow.
someone's trying to visualize it, if
Yeah.
it lands, if it meets the scientific criteria of something, it is a
Yeah.
good example of seeing
Yeah.
something happen. Like one of the things I saw was a tectonic shift. So it showed how in Vietnam, the tectonic plate shifted, just a little bit to the left. It's
So
basically two plates, one moving up, one moving down,
yeah.
but you
Yeah.
see it as a left and right shift. And it was because CCTV was pointed at that particular area and
Oh
saw that
wow.
and so I looked at it twice. I'm like, is it AI? Is it real? And I
Yeah.
had to
Yeah.
like read the document that was attached to it. But sometimes AI does generate some really cool stuff. But again, you need to know what you're watching and you need to be clear which
Yeah.
of something that actually has written evidence or research behind it. And yeah, that's my aha moment about like visuals and AI. I still wouldn't
Do
write a
you?
book with it, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I think we are done for the week. Wow, that went very quickly. And I don't know if we really solved it. We really
Design is
I mean we did. We kind of already talked about I mean we actually have a lot of problems. I mean that's the problem. They seem there's just so many little problems. It's actually hard to think about how to solve them.
very we've got to know how much we can chew and then narrow it down and work on those one or two things really well. But
Yeah.
this solves nothing.
Yeah.
That's what I've taken away
I
from it.
I actually thought that, when I first got into this, with the carriage book, I thought if I could just do a project where it wasn't a model of something, you know, it would it
Case
will be the
scenario.
beginning of something, but actually it's very hard to actually win,
Yeah.
you know,
No, because when
because you're fighting during it, you're fighting while you're trying to activate it. And then if the funding changes or the ownership changes, you lost it. It just goes to shit, you know? And you just lost years of work sometimes, which is a bit of a shame. You don't really get somewhere with it. It's not a body of work that you can really, uh, whereas often when I was looking at it in Singapore, you can actually see that body of work being built on. You can actually see this, the building blocks actually starting to, you know, go upward. Things are moving from this kind of stage to this kind of stage. Like I think we talked a while ago. Like they went from small parks to more naturalistic parks. You know, people are actually using them more differently, and then they're building even more of them. People are walking more. They're getting healthier. They're getting longevity. I mean, these are actual real things that I did not see happen in that same space and time here.
That we're human and we're learning as we go.
Yeah.
And I think coming back to the AI conversation is it allows us to spur the process faster.
Yeah.
Doubling it up,
Yeah.
So I think it broad stroke, I'm gonna get all the good stuff with. So I think that's where we are at, love.
Okay. All right. I think we're done for the day, and I will talk to you next week. I actually reached out to Raghu and to see whether he wanted a catch up. It's been like a couple of months. I think that would be interesting to sort of do another one that actually compares. You know, is there any
Right.
of the people that we know in Africa? It'd be sort of great if we could get an Africa person.
It's in South right.
What? Okay, your audio is cutting out.
So Stephen Rabia, I think.
Okay, we'll talk about this. We'll talk about it and figure
Yeah.
out because that'd be kind of cool to get like we'll start to grow our geographically. All right, take care.
All right.
Have a good week.
Bye.
Bye.